Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Hello, Patrick.
Hello, Kylene.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Recover You. Patrick is sitting here unable to walk on both feet.
Yeah, I had knee surgery on Thursday, so I am crutches bound for the next 6 weeks.
You're doing a good job.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you learned navigation in a solid 24, 48 hours.
Yeah. Well, I don't like to sit around, and I don't like to have people help me, which is probably some other problem. But no, I like to be able to do the things I can do within the limitations that I have.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that person that.
Today he was like, I'm going to shower because I need to go to work tomorrow. So I'm going to do it all by myself. So don't help me. Don't do anything. Just be there so I don't do anything stupid. So You did it all by yourself.
Yep.
Good job.
Going back to work tomorrow, and the knee's going to be better.
That's right. After this podcast, we have to practice driving and getting in and out of the car without me helping you and stuff
That's
like that.
right.
Okay. All right. It's on. So today we're going to talk about 3 lies that keep you stuck and prevent you from healing. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the same 3 lies and how they can keep the addict stuck and how the same lie can keep the betrayed partner stuck. So we might kind of take turns discussing from the addict perspective and the betrayed perspective, but the same 3 beliefs, the same 3 lies can keep both individuals stuck in their healing. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is, I can do this on my own, which is so funny because you just said that with your crutches. You're like, I don't like people to help me.
Yeah,
it's such a common thing.
Right.
And sometimes in a situation like you're just a go-getter, like you just want to, if you know how to do something, you want to do it by yourself.
Right.
But what we're talking about is someone that is an addict or someone that has just been betrayed going, I don't need anybody to help me.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start from the addict perspective. How can that belief keep someone stuck?
Well, what's interesting is if you talk to anybody who's ever been addicted and who is honest with themselves and is coming out of this and is really getting a lot of help and work, is they will recount to you the number of times that they tried to go it alone. The number of times where they said, all right, this is the time I'm going to actually make this happen. I'm going to put this own blocker in place, or I'm going to do whatever it is that it takes for me to do it without any help. And then they're going to look on almost 100% of the time they fail going at it alone. And part of the reason that they fail is because you need, like, this whole secret needs to die in light. So a lot of times what keeps you from asking for help on this thing in particular is because you're ashamed. So you don't want to admit to somebody, going to your parents and saying, I have a pornography addiction, or going to your spouse and saying, I have this secret thing that you don't know about, and it's a pornography addiction or affairs or whatever. That's really, really, that's a really hard boundary to hop over, or an obstacle to jump over. So, it's and you try. A lot of us do try. I remember I tried. I would do countdowns. I would do different things. I would look at different, maybe I'm just not thinking about it the right way, or maybe I'm not, there was just a lot of different ways that you kind of rationalize through it while missing the one piece of that particular assistance that you need. And what's so interesting about this, and I've used this before, is in a lot of other things that aren't shame-inducing, we don't really have a hard time getting help. We don't really have a hard time saying, hey, I need somebody to help me fix my car, or hey, I need somebody to give me a ride to the store, because it's not a shame. You're not ashamed to ask for a ride to the store. It's not a shame-inducing thing. So when you take shame out of it, we're much more interested in asking for help and receiving the assistance that we need. But you throw shame in there, it's just really hard to try to do it alone and to do it on your own.
We've talked about how that evolves too over time. And so I would say when it comes to getting help, it's not just how can I get into sobriety, or how can I get through the disclosure to share with my wife, right? Like long-term recovery looks like, how do I become the person, and getting people and tools and coaches and therapists and resources through this process. How do I become the person that I want to become, where this is no longer an issue in my life? And beyond that, how do I, if you're working through reconciliation, how do I show up in a way that works well in this relationship?
Yeah.
Right. And so we talk about that a lot, because I think sometimes it can be really tempting to go, well, I just have to deal with like the worst part of it. Right. And if I can get help to deal with the worst part of it, then I never have to talk about this. I never have to do anything about it ever again. And it's just like, that's not the reality. Like, of all the people that, we are aware of that go through this process, like I'm so very confident that you are in recovery, and that you never want to go back, and that you never want to do that, and that you've done all the work. And I believe that. And that doesn't mean you're going to just drop everything, that you're not going to have support systems in place,
Right.
that, but because that's so solid, your thinking has shifted and evolved into other areas of your life now. And so I think that it's important to kind of know that as recovery continues, it's more of a life process and not just an emergency process.
Mhm.
And I think some people can get really caught in, well, the emergency is gone now. The divorce isn't impending. I've done disclosure. I'm not wanting to relapse every day, and I think that's how we get in trouble, is thinking, well, now I can do it on my own. Maybe you're 2 years in and you go, now I can do it on my own. Maybe you didn't have that belief month one.
I think it's about the definition of what does it mean to be doing things on your own. So if you can develop a positive journaling habit while checking in with the faster scale every day, you can do that, right? You can absolutely do that, and you can get very good at that. And I would encourage people to take the steps to be very deliberate and intentional about doing that. Go on your Freedom Fight app, or print out the faster scale, or do your journaling. But what always comes in is you're not always going to be in recovery on your faster scale. You're going to have moments where you drop into anxiety or ticked off, or you're going to build resentment. Then that's, what do you need? Who are you reaching out to say, I'm struggling right now?
Mm-hmm.
And it may not be your spouse, or it may be your spouse, but you've got to have somebody that you're reaching out to, because here's the thing, we all need that. We all need that. And that's the beauty of life, is that we can rely on other people to say, you know what? I don't feel good right now. And you're talking about the things that you learn, the different ways you communicate. That's one of the most powerful things you do. Leading these two groups that I do on a weekly basis, when we do check-ins, I make sure I do a check-in on myself as well. I don't skip myself. I very well could, and nobody would ask. I do remember one time I was leading a group, and I think we were in a hurry or whatever, and the one check-in took a little long, and then I was like, okay, let's jump into the movie. And one of the members was like, hold on, how was your week? And I was like, no, he was right, because check-in is important for all of us to kind of say, hey, no, I didn't lie to anybody this week. I didn't have a double bind. If I did, this is how I addressed it. This was my commitment to change. This is what I struggled with this week. This is how low I got on the faster scale. Those are all recovery level activities that involve community.
Yeah. And I think, as we've talked about, wherever this phrase came from, the opposite of addiction is community. And so again, it's like that connection, that behavior was somehow self-medicating or processing. And I wouldn't say processing, self-medicating stress and negative emotions. Those stress and negative emotions don't go away. Like, that's part of life, right? So like 6 years down the road, you're going to have a stressful event come up. If you have disconnected from every level of support, every sense of community, every person that knows your story, what are you going to do? How are you going to process that? Who do you have to talk to? Are you personally aware that your stress is rising, right? So these are lifelong skills, even though you may never have the thought of relapsing.
Mm-hmm.
This is essentially, in my belief, what prevents that from ever happening again is that you're staying locked into connection with people who see you, people who know you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that you can feel like, okay, yeah, I had anxiety today. I talked about it. I processed it. I'm using the tools. Or, it doesn't even have to be related to this topic, but now everything that helps you get into sobriety helps you stay in lifelong recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the same belief or the same lie, I can do this on my own, can really hurt betrayed partners as well. I mean, I've shared openly. I had that belief right away. It was, this is your problem. You go fix it. And, to a point, that's correct. You had the addiction. You had to process that. The addiction's not my fault. And what I realized very, very quickly was, oh, the wounding that has caused me, I need help. I was really afraid in the beginning to go to therapy because I had had some negative therapeutic experiences in the past, and it really scared me. And so I was very gun shy, I was not sure that this is something that I wanted to get involved in. But once I dipped my toes in the world, I mean, look at it. I mean, now you can see I'm so invested in it, but I understand that can be a really, really scary thing. But what I want to share with the betrayed partner is we were not designed to do life alone. None of us were designed to do life alone. If a spouse dies, you are not designed to handle that by yourself. If someone gets diagnosed with cancer, you're not designed to do something for whatever reason. And you mentioned shame earlier, and I think this is a huge component of this. For whatever reason, we take this experience and we make it so isolating and so fear-inducing and so shame-inducing that nobody wants to talk to anybody about it. And it's one of the things in life that when it happens is the most needed to talk to somebody about it. It's the most scary. It's the most hurtful. It's the most painful in so many instances. But like you said, we will allow people to bring us meals when we are sick. We will ask for support. If somebody moves away or, passes away or whatever, all of these really difficult situations in life. Part of that too, I think culturally, is that people have an understanding of, well, what do you do if you realize that somebody's sick? You bring them meals, you send them a text, right? So there's a little bit of cultural misunderstanding or lack of education on this, which is, again, so much why we talk about it over and over and over. We want to bring awareness to it. We want to take the shame around it. But back to the lie itself, that the women have to do this on their own. I have to do this by myself, or I should, or I can, or I'm too afraid to talk to people. Every human being is designed to be in community. We are not created to deal with struggles in our life alone. And I think that isolation in this area in particular, you've been betrayed and you feel super isolated. It allows the shame that is not ours, by the way. We're carrying somebody else's shame. When we allow ourselves to be isolated because we're afraid of telling our mom or our friend or someone at church or going to a support group or reaching out for therapy, whatever it is, that breeds the shame, and it creates a breeding ground where it just grows. And now we're just carrying this load that wasn't ours. We didn't create it. Sometimes I even hear people, it's almost like, well, I can't talk to anybody because if we reconcile, then I don't want people to hate my spouse, right? And it's like, well, the safe people, and we do encourage you to, be careful who you talk to, but talk to people. The safe people are going to be Team You. And Team You means they want you to be safe. And if you are safe in reconciliation, a good friend is going to support you through that. And if you're choosing reconciliation because the partner is doing the work, they're also going to see that because you're going to be communicating that. And they're going to, it's a different experience. But my point is, isolation really breeds shame. It breeds the embarrassment. It also breeds a lot of resentment because there's this sense of, I'm doing this by myself. I'm resenting my partner for putting all of this on me. And all of this, when we don't have somebody to talk to and we're trying to handle it all ourselves, is creating a sense of I'm not being seen. I'm not being seen. I'm not being loved or appreciated, for all this pain that I'm experiencing, all this effort I'm putting in, all these things are going on behind the scenes right now. And that feeling can even be put on people who this feeling of I'm not being seen or appreciated, you can feel that around people who don't know, or maybe even especially around people who don't know what's going on at all.
Yeah, one of the things as you're talking through this, especially for the betrayed spouse, it really kind of highlights something that we don't learn a lot as a society. So I think some families do an amazing job of this, but some families don't. We don't get taught in our family systems how to express and then say what we need. So let me just kind of bring up an example. So you're nervous to go, you just found out that your husband has done all these horrible things, And so you need to go talk to your mom, but you're worried about what she's going to say. You don't feel empowered to come to her and say, hey, listen, I need you to listen and not pass judgment right now. I just need you to listen. And then you go ahead and communicate what's going on, how you're feeling. Like, I don't need advice. I don't need, you know what I mean? I know what I'm going to do. Like, we don't learn that very well in our family systems as we grow up. And so because of that, it's funny. It creates all of these roadblocks to finding help. And just there's a lot of organizations that end up doing it very well. And in a lot of cases, I think that's why in some cases, the support groups end up being a mind opening experience for people, for both the addicts and the betrayed. They come in, they go, wow, I'm not judged. Wow, I'm not, people are going to just understand where I'm coming from on this. And so that's why one of the major tenets is to try not to give advice in these groups, because it's to allow people to just talk and not be criticized or whatever that is. So I think sometimes, what can hit us is we don't quite know the X's and O's of, to use a football analogy, of how you're supposed to bring this forward, how you're supposed to talk about it. And so, if you did, you would be like, you know what, I don't care if Sally Mae doesn't like what's happening in my family. I need her to sit down right now and have a cup of coffee with me and just listen to me. And what would be the danger of saying that? But we're not taught that it's okay to say that.
Yeah. And I think too, the other piece of feeling like we can do it on our own is then we're not getting the support and the tools from professionals and the guidance to heal, right? What are the next steps? So, I've had so many, and even when we are willing to do that, I've had so many people connect with me and I kind of talk through the reconciliation process and the concept of a full therapeutic disclosure and what type of therapist their spouse should get into specifically for sex and porn addiction. And they've already talked to marriage counselors. They've already talked to, people at their church. They've already talked to so many different professionals in different areas. And they go, why has nobody told me this? What 30 minutes with you or an hour with you or whatever. And now I feel like I have guidance in this area. So I think reaching out and again, that's why we try to talk about it so much. It's not against saying anything against those people. They're trying to help. But if they don't have the education or awareness, that's what we're trying to do, is point you in the direction where you can connect to the right resources, because the sooner you can get connected to that, the quicker we can move towards, what we want in life. And I thought about this as you were talking, and I don't know that I ever really thought about it in these terms before, but a betrayed partner who is so personally convinced that they don't want to talk to anybody about what they're going through at all. I think that's an totally unconscious, because we wouldn't choose this intentionally, totally unconscious choice to increase our own trauma. Because if you feel like you have to go through this pain by yourself, and there's no one you can talk to, and nobody sees you, and nobody understands what you're going through, that the intensity of the emotions you're feeling and the fear and the isolation and the pain, I can only imagine that in those situations it increases. And to the opposite, I see when people take that brave step to talk to somebody, how relieved they feel that they have shared it with somebody. And to your point, the addict goes, oh, I finally feel seen. So does the betrayed partner. Right. And they finally tell a friend, or they finally connect to a support group. And I get it. I get the fear that's surrounding that. We talked about the idea that if you connect to a support group, you certainly want to connect to ones that, believe in healing, not just, wallowing in the present state and stuff like that. But even if you switch support groups or whatever it is, if you have a couple friends or somebody, if you haven't talked to somebody, it can be such a healing thing to be seen in the experience that you're having.
Yeah. And, and sometimes too, it's the people, born out of whatever depth of wounding that we have. There's a lot of denial in there on both sides. I think a lot of times what may happen with a betrayed spouse, and I never want to judge anybody, but what may happen with a betrayed spouse is they've been taught patterns on how to deal with their own feelings and wounding based on their prior life. So this is just a symptom of that. Like it becomes part of that pattern again. So nobody's ever said, no, we can help you through this, or no, you don't have to feel that way, or whatever that is. And same thing on the addict. The addict goes, well, I had a really, really hard time and I don't really know how to cope with it. So this is all I know. It's inappropriate, but this is all I know. And so both sides are essentially doing the best they can, in a way that is non-productive. And so it becomes a very, very, it's almost like they need a push in a lot of ways. And sometimes it's the other push. Sometimes it can be the addicted spouse gaining some healing and saying, hey, I think you need to go get some healing. I really, really do think you need to go get some healing. Or the, like you did with me, the betrayed spouse says, you need to go through. And I didn't know what a CSAT was. I had never even heard that term before. But it makes sense. If you have cancer, you don't want to get sent to a gastroenterologist. You want to go to an oncologist. That's what you want to do. And so I think there's a lot of interesting, there's limiters that will prevent us subconsciously from recognizing that we are wounded. There's a lot of denial that you see all the time that people go, no, I'll be fine. This is his problem. You can see even the most confident betrayed spouse in the world may go, nah, this didn't bother me. This is their thing. And maybe there's an element of truth to that, but I don't feel like any nature of betrayal is just to brush it off and say, hey, it's okay.
Yeah.
I think and it may not be the deep wounds that some experience.
Sure.
But I think there is a wound. There is a wound from it.
Oh, of course, because betrayal isn't betrayal unless it's from someone you care about.
That's right.
I mean, you have someone you trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
The second lie that we can believe and that can keep us stuck is they hurt me, therefore I can hurt them. Or a variation of that would be I'm allowed to express my emotions any way I want to. Like I'm valid in expressing them because of the situation, because of how I feel. I'm going to counter that with all emotions are valid, but not every way of expressing them is valid.
Yeah. I think from the addict side, and as you and I talked about this leading into this to recording this episode, I think you had mentioned something along the lines of maybe the and I'm sure this exists. I'm only going to speak to my experience. Let's say the spouse didn't feel well and was saying, no, I don't want to be intimate tonight. And then the partner acts out, right? So it's a kind of like maybe they get angry and they act out or whatever. I never remember that being my pattern. Just emotionally, I don't connect to that. I think it was I do remember feeling
that does happen though.
Yeah, no, I'm only saying that I don't resonate with that. I do remember feeling, and I know where this came from, that the weight of the world was like on me. Like I do remember feeling like it's hard to. I'm going to have a hard time putting this in words, but it felt like there was so much on me, and I didn't view it as like hurting you. Like I never viewed it that way, meaning like I wasn't like, ha 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 ha, I'm going to hurt her because she went to bed. Like it wasn't it wasn't there. I mean,
Like a revenge thing.
No, it wasn't that. I mean, I think I recognized it was wrong, which is why I tried to quit. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't something I wanted to be doing. I just remember these feelings that I used to get of like, everything relies on me. Nothing can break down with me. I have to be perfect because without that, and you think about like, it's such a wrong thing. Like nobody ever expected me to be perfect. You know what I mean? And when it came out that I wasn't perfect, nobody was like, well, you let us down. I mean, I betrayed you, right? I betrayed Keegan's trust, but nobody was like, it wasn't like this thing that everybody was like, well, we always expected you to be perfect. You know what I mean? It was like, no, you're a human being. We understand that you can't manage all of it. So it was, but anyway.
So this idea of they hurt me, therefore I can hurt them, or I'm allowed to express my emotions any way I want to, like coming from the addict side of things, I think this can come a lot when they are, and a little bit to our last episode, I think sometimes it can come in where, hey, I've been doing everything right And in that early phase, let's say the first 3 to 6 months, the betrayed partner is feeling extreme emotions. So maybe there is yelling, maybe there is a lot of crying, maybe there are some panic attacks, maybe there's screaming, maybe there's breaking things in the house. We've never experienced any of that. There's extreme.
To be honest, the cup didn't break. You tried. The cup didn't break.
Oh gosh, we probably haven't shared that story in a long time.
Yeah.
Recap. So we were downstairs, I think, going through
It was an abbreviated disclosure.
Don't do it. Anyway, and I had asked, hey, is there anything I don't know about? It was like the second sentence or the first thing on the list. And it was like something that he had lied to me about already. And there was a glass of water, and I did not throw it at him. I just threw it on the ground, but the glass did not break. It bounced off the floor onto the wall, dented the wall. Did it also dent the floor?
It did.
But the glass did not break. It's the strongest glass in the history of the world. But my point is, so in that phase where the betrayed partner is reeling in shock, they are just trying to make sense. They're extremely angry, extremely fearful. Their brain very much views you as the enemy. And this, for the first time possibly in life, is the first time that you're actually doing something, in integrity. You're totally you're not acting out. You are doing good. But your experience, I think sometimes that can be a real struggle point for the addict who's starting to get into recovery. And they can maybe also be resentful, and they can be angry, and maybe they can yell, in return. So maybe address it from that perspective.
Yeah, I think, I do remember feeling that a little bit man, this just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. And logically, I would be well, no, she has every right to be mad about everything that's happened. But it just doesn't matter what kind of healing. And, seeing some of your reactions, this is crazy. This doesn't make any sense. Meaning how are we going to get past this? What are we even doing? You know what I mean? And so, but what's interesting is when you think about things that shape you, things that are hard, things in life that you go through that are hard, they shape you. And so, you've spent your life or better part of multiple decades, let's say, dealing with your hard feelings in an inappropriate way. Now you have a chance to be in what is a very difficult situation and act appropriate and say, okay, well, this is where it's at. And I think some of it ties to what's the objective of why you're healing? Are you healing for the relationship? And that's it? Because if you're doing that, and the relationship can fall apart, it absolutely can fall apart, then your reason for healing falls apart. Or are you healing because it's the right thing to do and you want to live in integrity the rest of your days and finish well and all of those things? Because if you tie it to that, then you can stand there and you can get yelled at and you can get, the glare or whatever that may be. Then it makes sense because you're hey, this is a broader thing. This is a much broader, wider objective than because relationships fail. They do. But the way you live your life is there with you until the moment you take your last breath. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes what always hit me through that was, and I remember saying this to you, is I'm going to do this work regardless of whether we stay together or not. And I really, and you and I have talked about that recently, what if we split up now? What would that mean? And I'm no, it wouldn't change the trajectory for me. It just wouldn't, because, I've done a lot of work. I've gotten to this point. I'm finally feel a calling. I'm able to help people. And so why would I throw that away? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like that would just be inappropriate. So I think it's, like I said, I do remember being boy, this is hard. And I don't know if this is going to get any better. I really don't know if this is going to get any better. And, it's the whole, like you mentioned, you were talking about disclosure. I think sometimes people think that once you get past disclosure, and this may be some experiences for some couples, that it's never talked about again. That certainly has not been our experience. We hit disclosure and had a nice moment. But we kept going, and there's still discussions. And we just went to Curacao in September and had more discussions. And I think we were out in LA this past week, and there was some triggers, and things like that.
So much,
yeah.
just I think I mentioned something where it's it's such a plastic plate. It's so plastic, legit. The stereotype is for real.
Right.
And so then it's the smallest thing where it's that's a little reminder of, oh, but you aren't necessarily quote unquote attracted to that type or whatever. But I'm sure there were people that you were engaging with that had plastic surgery
Mhm.
and that had these different things or these different looks. And so that was like just this little like blip in my mind. And then I talked to you a little bit about it and I was like, man, it's just, stuff like that comes up.
Yeah.
And you have to feel free to talk about it. At least for me, the way my brain works.
I don't think you would be able to not talk about it.
Really? Where do you get that
I think
idea?
if we had an agreement that you weren't allowed to talk about it, I think you'd blow right past that.
Probably. But I think to that point though, like I sometimes I think what people do is they have this idea that talking about it is somehow wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's breeding inside of you and you don't have an outlet, back to the first point, if you can't talk about it with each other, then it's going to become a wall in between you. If you can't process it in therapy, then you're not going to get the tools to actually help it move through the body. If you can't get validation in a group that like or from a coach or whoever, that what you're feeling is really normal and that's a common part of the experience and that like this is happening to everybody else too, you're not alone, right? Then you're going to feel super isolated. So it is important that how we're feeling and what we're thinking gets expressed in the safe places. It's really, really important because then, your husband can go, the person that's hurt you can go, yeah, I know that, this is an outcome of my behavior and I'm sorry, and then you guys can move on. Or the therapist can say, hey, like if it really activates you, here are some tools and your coach can help you navigate that. Or your support group can just sit there and listen and validate your experience and say, yeah, I had a similar trigger last week. I know how you feel. It's going to be okay.
Yeah. And I always ask you, because you even said this past week when that was going on, you said, I should just stop bringing it up. And what did I say? I was like, no, it's okay. It's okay.
To the point of, I think when we've talked about this, I'm sure too before, but I think when I bring it up, it just kind of make you sad, right?
Well, like it does. I mean, I heard you. Right, yeah.
Sad.
Like, awesome. That was a great trigger. That was freaking sweet.
So then it's like, okay, should I just process this on my own? But no,
there may come a time where you recognize that and this is all part of this healing journey, where you recognize, you go, what, I'm just having a trigger right now. I don't need to talk about it. And I'm going to be okay. That may come up and you go, it's okay, but it's not. I've tried to make you feel like you can always bring it up. And I think I even asked you like, hey, what can I do for you? Is there anything I can do right now?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So on the betrayed side of they hurt me, therefore I can hurt them. I would just challenge that thought from the way that's even phrased. Do you think that's the right thing to do? Like revenge, right, vengeance, like just the concept. Do you believe that is a valid, like within your value system, within your belief system? Do you agree with that statement? If not, let's move on to the second part of that. I'm allowed to express my emotions any way I want to. And to that, I'm going to go back to my original reframe, right? Which is all of your emotions are valid. So I never want you to shove down, like if you are feeling angry, if you are feeling grief, if you are feeling sad, you're feeling frustrated, you're feeling resentful, all of those after betrayal are incredibly normal. So sometimes I hear from like women of faith that they really struggle with those emotions and they really just want to move through them very quickly. And that's a very, very common pattern among Christian women, I think, but it's also just common among humanity. I think that I want to get to the healing part fast, right? Like all of us, every single person on both sides of the aisle are going to go, I want to get to the healing part fast. How do I get there?
Do you mean Republicans and Democrats, both sides of the aisle?
Everybody on any sort of spectrum.
Yeah.
So everybody wants to heal quickly. Everybody wants to feel happy again, right? So, but what I'm going to say is that what we want to do instead is validate the emotions and find the healthy way to express them. Because what we don't want to do, I'm going to say within the first 3 to 6 months, it's survival. Okay. That's a little different than the rest of recovery. And I am going to put that qualifier in there, particularly for the betrayed. There will be strong emotions. You will express things probably in ways that are big emotions, right? There's still a line, right? Even within that time frame. Like I wasn't like punching walls. Yeah. I wasn't punching you. I wasn't throwing things at you, right? Like there is a line. There's always a line. Mm-hmm. And then that even gets maybe a little more significant after a certain period of time. So like in the beginning part, it's not that we want to shove them down or ignore them or even speed them up. what we want to do is we want to validate them and be like, I have a right to be angry. I have a right to be resentful. You've changed my life. You've taken this thing. There's an extreme amount of grief for the thing that I thought what I was building and the life that I thought I was living, and now it is no more. That is a very, very hard thing for our brains and our emotions to process. Extremely difficult. That's going to take a long time. Even if you check every single box and I love you desperately and all this kind of stuff, the two things can happen at the same time. I'm really proud of you, and I can be incredibly resentful for what you've taken from me, right? Those things can coexist. So the first 3 to 6 months, I'm just going to say, yes, the emotions will be bigger. They will be stronger, right? And they will continue over time. And usually I think after disclosure is when, for some people, emotions can even increase a little bit, because now it's like, now I have the information. Now I've created safety. I have everything, and he's not relapsing. He's not acting out. And logically we go, okay, things should calm down now. But now that our bodies actually feel safe, some of the deeper emotions can come up. So for some people, they actually may be pretty calm, cool, collected, very logical all the way up until disclosure. And then after that, feel a lot of grief, feel a lot of anger, feel a lot of resentment. For others, it might be a mix or a combination, but just know that either way is totally normal. So you are allowed to express your emotions. All of your emotions are super valid. There are healthy and unhealthy ways to express them. We never, on either side, whether you're the addicted or the betrayed, ever want to cross the line of being physically abusive to the other person, or even really verbally abusive. I'm trying to remember, and you can tell me if I crossed any lines that first 6 months.
This morning.
What's this one? I think that I always expressed very completely how I was feeling. I don't think, tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think there were many, if any, times where I turned it into a personal attack and putting you down and being like, you're such a horrible, evil person.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. I mean, there was anger in there. There was, sometimes you raised your voice. I mean, but
yeah.
No,
So that's what I'm talking about, where there's a line, right? We don't want to be physically abusive either direction. We don't want to be verbally abusive. Sometimes I think what can happen is the betrayed partner can hold on to these very strong emotions of bitterness, anger, resentment, because in the beginning, there's anger that is at what I'm going to call a righteous anger of, you did this bad thing to me and it's evil and it's wrong and it's taken something from me and I'm angry about it. And that is anger. And then there's anger and resentment and bitterness that comes up because it feels more empowering to hold on to those emotions than to start expressing the vulnerability of, you broke my heart. You've desperately hurt my feelings. I feel completely insecure. My body image is really hurting because of this. I feel compared. I feel broken. That is harder to express than, I'm really angry at you.
Right.
And so we want to be careful that as we continue healing, we're not holding on to, and we never want to cross the line of attacking each other as human beings. That is a line, I think, that when you're talking about, I have a right to express myself, absolutely, all of your feelings are valid. There is a line of, you're still with a person. You're still with a human being who also has feelings, who also has trauma, who also has, a history. And of course, we've always talked about the idea that, separation is totally possible. If you can't come to a place where you can treat each other, in a healthy way, then that's okay to separate, even if you like each other. But if you're moving towards reconciliation, you really want to move towards this mutual respect, even if there is the pain underneath that. Those things can coexist. Right. You've hurt me and I respect you as a human being. It doesn't mean, just to clarify spiritually, I don't respect you as like being over me in any sort of leadership, but it was so funny. Tangent. I had some cocktails the other day. It was like, I don't know, a week ago or something. And whenever I have a little bit of cocktails, I will have like trains of thought just come out of my mouth. And historically it's been like, do you want to have kids? Do you want to know, what about this? And da, da, da. And then the last time it was just talking about evangelical patriarchy and the leadership and the head of the house and that sort of thing. And I was just like, and Patrick was just having this conversation with me. It was so funny to me because he got knee surgery and he ends up on all these drugs and all this medication and he's doped up and now he's ranting against the evangelical patriarchy.
I was being very nice though.
And how men, hold it over women and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, let's talk about it some more.
So the next podcast, I'm going to be on tramadol.
Yeah. The opioids, get it out of you.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was cute. And no, you were you're super chill while you're talking about it, but you're like, yeah, no, you're right. So my point is, on both sides, we always want to reframe this in your emotions are valid. They're there to express something, whether it is hurt, whether it is a righteous anger, whether it is, a broken spirit or hurt feelings or insecurity or whatever it is. We always, there is a line. We always want to make sure, yes, we can express our feelings, and we certainly want to deepen the communication. We have a lot of episodes talking about, vulnerability and emotional connection and deepening intimacy and communication between the partnership. There is a line in how we do that. And we want to find the healthy middle where it is expressed, but we are not powering over the other person. We're not putting them down. We're not making it personal in the sense of attacking them as a human being and vilifying them as a person. I think that is very important to be careful of. Number 3, the third lie, and by the way, so just obvious, I think we don't even have to summarize necessarily. That can keep you stuck, right? It's going to keep you stuck in your pain. It's not going to help you move forward, and it's not going to help the relationship move forward. So the third lie is that porn isn't infidelity, and how this can keep you stuck. This is a big one, I think, because I think people in the secular world would certainly believe that porn isn't any sort of infidelity. But what I think really will just blow my mind is how the Christian community supposedly has such a high standard of marriage, but then doesn't define porn as infidelity in some cases. And they really want to split hairs. And I actually have been thinking about doing a fairly long series where we're talking about breaking down the scriptures in relation to divorce and marriage and fidelity and all this kind of stuff. If you're interested in that, please let me know, because it is an undertaking, but it's definitely something I'm super passionate about, because when we split hairs, instead of having this clear, you have the standard, you hold the standard. You don't split these hairs, because it allows so much abuse to go rampant in the Christian culture. And anytime there is abuse that people then associate with the name of Jesus and with biblical authority, it totally makes me want to vomit. And I was thinking about this concept the other day, how when you live in a lie, you only live in the lie because you think it's true. Like when you were in the addiction, you thought, I have to do this on my own. Everybody's going to hate me. And you thought that was so true that it kept you stuck.
Yeah.
The reality, the truth, now that you're in the truth, that reality seems so distant to you, right? And I was thinking about how when we're in a lie, we really think that it is true. And then when we're in the truth, the more we live in the truth, the more the lie becomes repulsive and disgusting. And I feel like that with this concept that porn isn't infidelity, and I feel like that with the Christian culture, as a Christian who was raised one way and who now believes totally differently, that the lies that are used to perpetuate abuse in the Christian culture and in Christian marriage is almost hard for me sometimes to understand how that comes to be, and how people live in that system, even though I totally understand it. But now that I'm so far removed from it, it's just so it's so upsetting to me, because anything that is used to keep people stuck is so the opposite of what the gospel is when it comes to living in integrity, living in authenticity, having freedom in Christ, true freedom. Right. And so anyway, total tangent, sort of, not really, but the third lie that keeps us stuck is that porn isn't infidelity. So you would even mention in the first point that as you were thinking about getting into recovery yourself, you're like, I never thought about it in the right way. And I think one of the ways that people think about it that really, 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 really keeps them stuck is that it's not cheating on their wife. If you don't think it's cheating, why is it wrong?
Yeah.
And what I really want to ask people who have this belief system is, how do you define fidelity?
Right.
Like when you take a vow, and in the Christian belief system, a covenant between you, your spouse, and God, when you make that promise and that covenant and that commitment, what exactly is your definition of fidelity if porn fits within that? That's what I want to know.
I think, it's what's interesting is and I've worked with a lot of men on this, but there are different consequences to different levels of behavior. So, for example, there is illegal behavior that's done. You can go to jail for that. There is a financial consequence to certain behaviors in this world. There is a relational consequence to things. And so I think, probably one of the most honest things that can be said when you categorize pornography against prostitutes, against affairs, against whatever, is there are varying level of consequences. There could be varying level of consequences between them. And that is a real thing, and it should be talked about in an open and honest way that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's also sometimes in talking between couples is they may have different standards. So and I would challenge this. So let's say the husband says, well, my wife said pornography was okay. And you go, okay, well, does she know the frequency? Does she know what you're looking at? Does she know like all of these things? You know what I mean? I would argue that you probably are doing it more than she agreed to. And you know what I mean? Or whatever that may be. So like that, you're already crossing line, right? There's already a line being crossed. So I heard this one time that talked about, if the Bible is clear on something, then take it clearly. If the Bible's vague, then maybe be a little bit more kind, whatever. But there's a passage out of Matthew that I think this really resonates. And when I say this, I don't want to shame anybody, but this is just to allow people to think. And this is Jesus talking. And Matthew 5:28 says, "But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." So, and this is not just for men, this is for women as well, but the standard is very, very high. What Jesus defines adultery as, which you could then by synonym say infidelity, right? Adultery, infidelity, is if you look at somebody with lustful intent in your heart. So
what do you think?
What is pornography, right?
What do you think falls within that
Yeah,
category?
Yeah. And so, I think there's
a couple words in there that's important.
Mhm.
Intent and adultery.
Right.
So the Christian community will say the only reason for divorce is adultery, but then they choose to take porn outside of infidelity for whatever reason. And it's very clearly listed in my mind here because you say with lustful intent. What are you doing with pornography?
Right.
There's no other purpose other than intentional lusting.
Yeah. Well,
and sexually acting out to people that are not your spouse. That's the only purpose of it.
Well, in society, we'll say things like, well, men have needs like more than women. And, they'll go into these little, like explanations that are really shitty. In a way, men have needs.
I can't believe you just swore on the podcast.
Yeah, sorry. Men have have a need for release or whatever that may be. That kind of seems to try to justify these things. And so, I think it's to me, and when I've
one of the fruits of the spirit is self-control. So
that's
that's
right.
One of the most hypocritical things, even if you're taking this back into the Christian church, that they will excuse lack of self-control and stepping out of the marriage when one of the fruits of the spirit and one of the things that you're supposed to move towards is actually having self-control. So I would break that down in sex is not a need, first of all.
It's not. It really isn't.
If you want more in your relationship, then look at the relationship. Not the sexual activity. And 3, when you define it outside of it's not a need, it's a connection with your partner, right? And then a lot of this sort of framework that they use to excuse the behavior sort of falls apart.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting to me is like I often feel about it this way is do wives react the way they do because of the pornography? Well, of course, but there's so many layers in that. There is manipulation, there's hiding, there's secrets, there's broken agreements, there's all of these different things that kind of go into it. that lustful behavior kind of brings around. Once again, I'm not going to judge anybody on any of this stuff here because they're always what's the term everybody gets? You have a hall pass in your marriage or something
Oh,
like
yeah.
that. So like a woman will have an actor or whatever, or a man will have it. Like,
Okay,
you got
but
to be careful with
I also
those things too. You know what I mean?
I
Like,
want to clarify the lustful intent, right? So
yeah,
there to also one of the things that people get confused about in the Christian community, especially when they're in the recovery community, is, oh, I can't ever find anybody attractive.
right.
So
right.
that's also not true. And that
That's
will
right.
also
Yeah.
keep you very, very stuck. It will keep you afraid. It will keep you walking through the world in fear. And what we want for you is to walk through the world in freedom, making good choices.
Right.
And so, no, you are going to find people attractive. That's a normal thing. Men are going to find women attractive. Women are going to find men attractive. Now, do you go look at pornography with the intent to masturbate? Do you go take sexual energy away from your partner because you're daydreaming about that person in a sexual way? Like there's a difference between, oh, I walked around the street and I was like, oh my gosh, there was someone that was very attractive. And then you kind of move on and you finish your walk.
Right.
And versus like holding on to that and utilizing it and fantasizing about, or whatever it is that just doing other things with that in your mind.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between between just like walking through the world and finding people attractive and lustful intent equal being adultery.
Well, and I think too, sometimes what you'll see is when a lot of guys get into recovery, the early stages, they still equate those two the same, and it freaks them out a little bit. Like, oh my gosh, I found that, that she's pretty. I've done something wrong. Like, no, you haven't. You actually haven't. You haven't done anything wrong.
Right.
You've only done something wrong if you move it to the point of lustful intent. And so, like, and I've seen guys, and I understand why guys will do this. Some guys will stop working out in gyms for a period of time as they move through their recovery because that was part of their acting out pattern, right? They go to the gym, they get maybe triggered by somebody or whatever. And then so they just to kind of, as they're working through their own process, they go, you know what, I'm not going to go to a gym, I'm going to work out in the basement for a while. But then at such point where they're in recovery, in deep recovery, and they're feeling really, really good, they should be able to go to a gym and be able to work out and not really have, and just allow people to go about the world and they go about it as well. So I think it's it's interesting to me because I asked the group this a couple of weeks ago, and I asked them, hey, did you feel pornography is infidelity? And I think the majority of them said no. And then I read the verse, and I read it in a way, it wasn't like, it wasn't a fire and brimstone preacher standing up, but I read the verse. I said, well, now that we know that Jesus said this, we know what Jesus is, right? Jesus is all about love. What do you think now? And they're like, yeah, no, it's infidelity. I'm like, right. Yeah. So if you know it's infidelity and it would hurt your spouse, are you okay with your spouse being unfaithful to you in that light? Oh, no, I would be upset. Okay. All right. Well, then there you have it.
Yeah. Well, I think understanding that is important because the value or the lack of value that you put on something helps you make your decision.
Mhm.
So when people say, I don't equate this with having a physical affair, then they qualify it in a way that, well, this is better behavior than that. And it's not. Like you were mentioning earlier, there are different consequences. There's STDs that aren't going to happen from pornography, right? There's, maybe someone is more likely to divorce immediately if there was a physical affair than maybe
Mhm.
not, right? And some people might totally value them the same.
Mhm.
But there's certainly in many situations different life consequences from different behaviors. But if you hold fidelity, and I'm going to go back to that idea of like, what do you define as fidelity? What do you define as sexually choosing your partner? What do you define as staying faithful to one person? What do you define as monogamy? Because if that definition does not include sexually acting out to other people, then pornography is infidelity, period. So if that's the case, then viewing it as anything other than that is going to keep you stuck because you don't think it's as bad. So on the addict side, right? The same thing happens on the betrayed side. And I see a lot of times this is gets really confused in the faith community where women go, well, marriage is such a high priority and divorce is such a bad thing. They almost equate it with a sin, which it's not. Jesus would never condone a sin, and he not only condones it, he builds on it. The concept of divorce in the New Testament. So they view divorce almost as a sin. They're confused because they feel like this feels like infidelity to me, but then they're being told this isn't infidelity. They're totally stuck then because they go, well, how do I set a boundary? How do I use my voice? I feel very used, but I shouldn't feel used because it's not the same thing. I feel like it's an affair, but I shouldn't feel like that because it's not the same thing. And then they're in a cycle of church abuse, and they're in a cycle of sexual abuse from their spouse, or because that's what pornography. I'm going to be totally clear. My belief system. You can agree to disagree. Anybody listening can agree to disagree. That's fine. But I think pornography equals infidelity, which is sexual abuse because it takes the consent away from the partner. I think that, the lying and the manipulation is abuse. All of it's abuse because it's hiding, it's withholding, it's denying, it's taking the energy away from the partner. It's not being honest. And anytime you're not being honest, you're taking consent away from your partner, and that is abusive. But Christian women can get very, very stuck in this because they go, well, I have really been taught that it's not the same thing, but I feel like it's the same thing. When I find out all of a sudden that I've been betrayed and my partner has been acting out in this way, and yes, you've mentioned like a lot of times it's the lying and the betrayal that really keeps people, in the pain part for the betrayed spouse. But I don't want, that's what a lot of people get really stuck on in terms of like, how can I trust somebody again?
Mhm.
But the betrayal part does have a lot to do with the images you looked at, with taking the sexual energy away from the relationship. And so there is a tremendous amount that pornography, cyber sex, physical affairs, whoever, whatever it was, that is the pain part of, that's the breaking part. That's the destroying the relationship part. And then what's hard for the recovery and the reconciliation is how can I trust that person because they've lied? And that's why it kind of maybe even shows up longer when you're talking about how do I deal with the lies, is because that's the rebuild part of like, how do I trust somebody who's lied to me? But the actual betrayal part has a lot to do with how somebody was acting out or what they were looking at, and dealing with the comparison and dealing with the lack of self-worth because you chose to look at somebody other than me.
Mhm.
So that part is very, very extreme for a lot of people. And it's less extreme for other people because of how they view it. But I think that either way, on either side, people can feel very, very stuck in their healing when they don't view this clearly cut as infidelity, because then you're like, well, how do I deal with it if it's not actually infidelity?
Well, it's interesting too. I actually think, you talk about people who will couch it that way. I know when I was discovered, I wanted to do everything I could for you, right? I wanted to do everything I could from a healing standpoint. I wanted to do everything I could. And there was some sketchy advice that came in from someone. And I remember thinking in my way of wanting to help, I'm like, well, is that and the point is like when you're a newly discovered addict, you don't have an opinion, right? You're just trying to formulate the paths forward. So you rob that discovered addict of the opportunity to really do the right thing when you tell that person, no, it's not, pornography is not infidelity. Like, does that rob some of the energy from the recovery effort if it's just pornography versus like, oh no, this was a long, decades long pattern of infidelity in your marriage? The addict may go, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure this is right, and not versus a half approach or a less than approach, So I don't know. I feel like when that message is perpetuated, that's one of the negative, beyond all the other things
Yeah.
that you've articulated, is you take what could be good men
Right.
who want to do the right thing, who were stuck in something and needed all the help they could get, and you rob them of that chance to really lean in. And a lot of times therapists will say, well, now you need to lean in. You rob them of that chance to really lean into, the things that are hard, and to lean in and say, I'm going to make this right. And I'm going to,
Because if somebody
you shouldn't do that to people.
Because somebody, if you really respect, is telling you that it's not actually that bad, or it's not actually cheating on your spouse, then why aren't you going to keep that door open?
Yeah.
It's been a successful coping mechanism for you.
That's right.
And if your brain on some level thinks that it's acceptable for any reason, even if your partner is hurting, why wouldn't you open that door again when you're really stressed out?
That's right.
What's to keep you, if you know that you're going to go to your advisors, they're going to be like, yeah, I get it. And that's all the advice you're going to get.
Yeah. Right. And that, it's funny. That's not what I say when people call me. They're like, I'm struggling. I'm like, okay, how do we lock things down?
Exactly.
That's usually the first thing I start talking about. How do we lock it down so you don't do it again?
Mm-hmm.
And then we start talking about the healing parts and all of these things and the impact.
Yeah. It's the immediate emergency state.
Yeah.
And then the deeper healing. Absolutely. So I think that those can really, it just causes a lot of confusion. It causes a lot of confusion. And the reality is that for most couples who choose monogamy and choose marriage, the spouse is going to feel incredibly betrayed because that doesn't fit within their definition of fidelity. And so if that is true, then the confusion of getting advice of, well, it's not that bad, is going to feel incredibly hurtful. So I think that can keep both people stuck in a lot of different ways. So the three things: I can do this on my own. We need people. We need to talk to people. We need to be able to share our emotions. We need to be able to communicate and get help. 2, I'm allowed to express my emotions any way I want to. All emotions are absolutely valid, but there are limits to healthy expression of those. We certainly don't want to suppress them, but we want to learn. Again, this is why coaching and therapy and support groups can be very helpful. They teach you those tools. They help you learn how to communicate those in effective ways. And 3, the third lie of porn isn't infidelity. Again, anyone spiritually, morally, ethically, put it through your own filter, do your own research. You can agree to disagree. I don't really think there's any flexibility in my theology around that. I think it's pretty clear. So we hope that by thinking through these, maybe they have freed you up a little bit to seek some new resources, gather some new support, some new help, and to maybe have some deeper conversations together. Until next week, we will see you then.
Goodbye.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.